Now let's zoom out even more and take a look at the kind of snapshot of US/North American picture. In 2008, US GDP stood at $14.6 trillion. Out of that, about a quarter, $3.64 trillion, was spent on projects. If you extrapolate that proportion to the global level, about $13 trillion spent on projects worldwide in 2008. We can argue about the numbers. I mean, the only consensus I'm looking for is that there's a lot of money being spent on projects worldwide. If you look at industry statistics, first at the portfolio management level, at the strategic level, which projects are being selected and how they're being selected. 84% of companies either do not conduct business cases for their projects or perform them on select key projects. Why are we doing this? Question in 84% of the cases not being answered. 89% of companies are flying blind with no metrics in place except for financial data. Financial data here implies forecasts, and they're notoriously unreliable, both when it comes to project costs and when it comes to project revenues. 84% of companies are unable to adjust and realign their budgets with their business needs. To make a long story short, as one of the directors of again, I refer to them as semi-government company that is involved in very large projects, told me, he says 99% of projects in our company start with a CEO walking into the conference room and saying, wouldn't it be really cool if we could do this? Project started without any assessment of whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, or maybe we have other projects to do. If you go to the project management level, the delivery of the project, irrelevant of whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. As of 2009, 19% of projects are outright failures, means they're not delivered, they're canceled because there's so much overtime or so much over budget. 46% are trouble projects, and trouble project in the context of that study was defined as either significantly late or significantly over budget. I'm not talking about 2-3%, I'm talking 50% over budget. If you add up these two inputs, 40% of project investments fail to deliver the intended results. So 40% of the money we invest into projects, which is 1.45 trillion in US and 5.2 trillion worldwide, gets wasted. Either because we select bad ideas, or because we select maybe good ideas but we suck at delivery. Make sense? Surprising numbers to any of you?
I'm surprised the 40% isn't higher.
So let's try working through some very, very simplified case studies that I have developed. Try to come up with a formula to what does it take to deliver successful project results. So case study number one. I'm a CEO of a product development company, and I hire one of you as a project manager. And I tell you, your job is to deliver the best typewriter ever built by the mankind. For simplicity, assume, whatever assumptions I'm going to give you, assume that they're right assumption, 100%. I'm going to give you reasonable budget. I'm going to provide you with reasonable timeline. I'm going to make sure that all of the people who really know, what is the best typewriter, what is the functionality of that typewriter, are willing to spend time with you. Make sense? Now, assume that you have enough project management knowledge, you adjust it accordingly to the project that you're working on, and you deliver that typewriter on time, on budget, and you deliver the full scope of requirements. Make sense? Question number one. And again, these are not trick questions. Do you think you did a good or a bad job as a project manager? You told what you were, did whatever you were told to do. You delivered on time and budget. Assuming that we're in 2010, do you think this product will sell successfully on the market?
No.
Why not? For the last 20, 25 years, we have been using what? Microsoft Word, right? So whose fault is it? And notice there is a difference between great project and project that was successfully delivered. You can have a crappy idea and deliver it successfully. So the first conclusion that we can make is that in order for the company to deliver successful projects, the executive management must select good projects to implement. Whatever good implies, and it differs from company to company. Good for Apple would be completely different than what is good for City of Vancouver. Make sense? Second example that I typically like, I teach project management in the evening at BCIT to professionals. So kind of age group in my class are pretty much the same as in this room here. And I tell them, pretty much at the end of the class where we learn everything about project management, I tell them that the average number of questions on my final exam is 5. And the duration of the final exam is limited at 2 hours. And then I tell my students, what happens if I go nuts and I give you 100 questions of the same size and complexity on the final exam that will still last 2 hours? What's going to happen to the average in the classroom? Again, this is not a trick question. Probably. Oh, and the assumption that I give them, assume all of you are A+ students. But I still give you, instead of 105 questions, I give you 100 questions.
Well, the average should stay the same.
Compare the average between 5 questions on the final exam?
No, between overall 100 people answering questions and them all answering 5. You can't compare the two.
But that's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to compare 2 scenarios. 5 questions on the final exam, all of them are A+ students, and this is the reasonable number. And 100 questions on the final exam with the same group of people. What's going to happen to average from first scenario to the second one?
Well, I presume you're going to normalize the stuff anyway.
No.
No, you're not. Okay, you're not. Okay.
It will drop. That's the answer I was looking. It was probably going to drop from A+ to F, right? Some of the students, after thinking a little bit more, they tell me, you know what? We also think none of the questions will be in the classroom will be accomplished properly. Why? Because all of us will be panicking and jumping from question to question, trying to finish them all, right? This sounds like a really, really silly example if you use final exam and questions on the final exam. But as soon as you substitute that with projects, the throughput capacity of your company and the number of projects thrown at you people, and many of you mentioned resources and project prioritization, suddenly this is not that funny anymore. So the second conclusion that you can make, that in order for the company to deliver successful projects, the number of projects that you throw at your employees must somehow to correspond to the throughput capacity of your company. So if your company has a capacity to deliver 20 projects in a given year, and they're all excellent people, excellent project managers, excellent technical resources, and you throw 100 projects at them, they're not going to deliver any of them properly or on time. Case study number 3. Let's say I own a piece of land, I don't, but let's say, somewhere on an exotic island in Caribbean. Let's say I decide, you know what, I don't really need that piece of land. What I'm going to do, I'm going to build some investment property on that land, and I'm going to sell it for profit, and I'm going to make some money. Again, whatever assumptions I'm giving you, assume they're correct. Let's say I conduct a study of the homes in the area and say, you know what, the house that I'm going to build, there is a high confidence, I have a high confidence it's going to sell for $500,000. I conduct a study, I talk to construction companies in the area, and they tell me, you know what, we're fairly certain that you can build it for $400,000. So, I use back of the envelope calculation and say, okay, I'm just doing it just for the money, right, as an investment. I'm going to buy something, I'm going to build something for 400K, I'm going to sell it for 500K. 500K minus 400K divided by 400K, 25% return on investment. Make sense? Let's say that, and again, assume that all of these numbers are correct. Let's assume that I don't do due diligence when it comes to hiring a contractor, and I just hire first guy off the street. I don't check his credentials or what kind of project management expertise he has. Because I live on the West Coast and the construction is happening in the Caribbean, I can't fly there frequently. And at the end of the year or at the end of the construction period, I received the news that because he used ad hoc approach, he kind of started building from a drawing on a napkin. He didn't have the right resources. He didn't get the right materials. He didn't have the right schedule. He had to, tear it down and start rebuilding. The project cost went up to $600,000. And now I am doing the calc, and I am, let's say, legally obliged to pay that amount of money. So I'm doing my ROI calculation now, and it's quite different. It's 500K minus 600K divided by 600K, minus 16.7%. So it just went from plus 25 to minus 6. I'm losing money on this deal. So some questions. Was this project a good idea overall? Yes, right? I mean, if the assumptions are correct, then I said assume that they're right. 500 minus 400 divided by 400 is 25% return on investment. What factors prevented this venture from becoming a successful project? Was it the selection of the project, the portfolio management? No. Execution. Or the other word for that? Project management. So the project management was the one that was suffering. Why ad hoc approach, no planning, improper resource selection, etc., etc. So the conclusion number 3, that in order to deliver successful projects, the company must have a good grasp on the tactical side, aka project management, scoping, estimation, planning, execution, control, etc., etc., etc. Now, one of the problems that I have when I talk to senior level people at the companies, as opposed to, say, project and product managers, is that very frequently what I hear from senior level people is that they're still not convinced that having project management or having dedicated full-time project managers on staff is a good idea. Whether you agree with that or not, but that's the reality in the business. I have seen cases where companies that were involved in $100 million projects, where the executives told me, yes, we have issues with our projects. Yes, we're 50% over the budget. On
What kind of industries are you talking about?
that particular example, government. Where, yes, we're 50% over the budget on a $100 million project, but how do I know that project management is the answer? And here is the trick, or again, another case study that I've devised to answer that question, which worked so far very well. For that, we go into 16th, 17th, even 18th century. Typically any European army, but I used British Army as an example. And trust me, it will make sense by the time we get to the end of the case study. The British Army had a very strange management system in the past centuries. The ranks, lieutenant, major, captain, colonel, etc., were not awarded for merit, valor, or even educational level. So basically, any person off the street could walk into the War Office, Department of Defense, pay some money, and get his patent, officer's patent. The business model was such that even if you acquired a patent, say a colonel's patent to head a regiment, you wouldn't be paid a high salary. You would be expected to generate your income from the spoils of war. And I don't have to explain to you how that worked, right? You took over a town, certain percentage of commissions went to you, the rest was paid to the War Office. The higher your rank, the higher the percentage of the commission that you got. So if you look at it, it doesn't sound like a very attractive deal. You pay money for the patent, then you don't get paid high salary, plus you have to pay big percentage of your spoils of war to the government. And yet people willingly paid enormous amounts of money for these commissions. As a matter of fact, there's a recorded sale of the colonel's rank through a newspaper classified ad in 1840 for £30,000. And I'm talking £30,000 in 18, so that's about $3 million US in today's dollars. A more specific example, one fellow called Arthur Wellesley. 1787, his family purchases him, his family decides enough sitting at home doing nothing, purchases him a commission of a lieutenant, but he's 18 at the time and he does not feel like reporting to duty. So apparently the family was very wealthy and they decided to address that issue by buying him progressively higher ranks. So by the age of 25, he becomes a colonel in charge of his own regiment. And he goes into war, suffers several losses from Napoleon, but finally manages to, in Spain and at Waterloo, to beat French Emperor. He becomes quite prominent in England, gets the title of Duke of Wellington, peerage, 1828, becomes the Prime Minister of England. Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington.